one of the sections of the book that impacted me the most and that I plan to cite extensively was the section where you talked about how the way that Christ related to women was so radical for its time for Greeks
Mm.
and for Jews, because there's a whole contingent of men online who really take they flip feminism around and they become chauvinism, right? They do their end of it where they start. So can you go through some of those examples? Because I bookmarked that page and I was really looking forward to asking you about it. It's very powerful examples.
Yes, except I probably wouldn't say Greek, I'd say Roman. Right?
Roman, sorry, yes.
Yeah, that the early church was born into ancient Rome. An ancient Roman culture where, first of all, women had very low value. I mean, women were for having legal heirs. Wives were for having legal heirs, but men could have sex with just about anyone else they wanted to, and it was socially acceptable. With prostitutes and mistresses and courtesans and their slaves. The majority of adultery happened with slaves because the slaves are right in your household, and slaves, men and women, because there was a lot of homosexuality, adults and children. Children were fair game too. We have lots of records of boys, slave boys, being raped. So the culture at that time, what Christianity asked of women morally was not all that different. What it asked of men morally was dramatic, was revolutionary. In fact, you find church fathers like Augustine, 4th century, was still giving sermons to Christian men on why it was not permissible to have sex with their slaves. These practices were hard to eradicate. And so he writes, and he says to the wife, I understand how this hurts you. I know that that this is not good. Your husband is sinning against you. And then he turns to the husband and said, "Cut it out. You're sinning." But women flocked to the early church. The Christian church has always had more women than men, but it was right from the beginning, because already in the early church, women had far more dignity, far more status, and far more standing in the eyes of their husbands, because suddenly the man was supposed to take all his erotic energy that had been dissipated, many, many different directions, and he was supposed to focus them strictly on his wife. And suddenly his wife was not having to compete with all these other people. One of the most troubling quotes is actually in my earlier book, Love Thy Body, but it was, I read a book in which it quotes a Roman writer chastising a wife because she was jealous of her husband. And he says, you can't be jealous of your husband when he has sex with a slave boy, because everybody knows sex with boys is more pleasurable. So that's what women were up against at the time. I know. I mean, we need to recognize how different Christianity. We take Christianity for granted, right?
Yeah.
It's become, in many ways, it's the wallpaper of Western culture. So things like this help us to pull out what was unique about Christianity. And another example I like to give is we read the Bible sometimes through these kind of rose-colored glasses, we're kind of sentimental. One of them being when Jesus blessed the children. It just sounds like such a Sunday school moment. And we have these, Victorian paintings that are kind of soft focus and pastel colors. But that was actually quite radical as well, because children had very little value. In Roman culture, they were considered non-persons. Abortion and infanticide were both very common, which is another sign of a low view of children, and a low view of women, because abortion killed a lot of them. And by the way, another reason it's low view of women, because the majority of the children killed both through abortion and infanticide were girls.
Yeah.
It was very rare for a Roman family to have more than one token daughter. They'd kill the rest. So setting the scene for the view of children, it was very common for them to be beaten. That was not considered abnormal. Romans treated children as, they just weren't rational. Remember the Romans and the Greeks, they were the civilization that prized reason. And so children were not rational, and therefore they were not even fully persons. And they were weak and irrational. And so when Jesus says, let the children come to me. Well, first of all, you can kind of understand why his disciples said, get rid of these kids,
Hmm.
because they're infected with that same mentality. And Jesus says, no, bring the kids to me. This was revolutionary as well. There's a whole book on this, by the way. Um, I think the title is when children became people, something like that.
Hmm.
And it's all about how Christianity revolutionized our view of children. And nowadays we see children as these precious little creatures that are, worthy of protection and cherishing. That was the product of Christianity. And so Jesus saying, let the children come to me. And Jesus saying things like, if you don't accept if you don't come into the kingdom as a child, you don't come into the kingdom. You should read the church fathers who said, what in the world did he mean by that?
Wow.
It was almost humorous, them saying, nobody had ever set children up as an exemplar for adults. No one had done that. So again, that's another example where we just don't recognize how revolutionary Jesus' own treatment was. His own, and of women, of course, the fact that he traveled with women, the fact that he taught women, he taught mixed audiences
Hmm.
of men and women, and of course the key one of being Mary who sat at his feet. Sitting at his feet was metaphor then for being a disciple. So when he says, "Hey, leave Mary alone," she's being a disciple, and that's good. Um, and even things like respecting women, touching women, talking to women in public. You remember probably that in Jewish culture, women were not supposed to be spoken to in public, except by a relative.
Yeah.
But he spoke to women in public. He gave women some of his greatest theological insights, like "I am the resurrection and the life." He gives that one to Martha, who he had earlier scolded. I thought, whoa, that's amazing. um, he had scolded her for being too concerned with women's work, notice. And then he gives her this really deep spiritual insight. So all that to say, yeah, Jesus' own treatment of women was extraordinary, and it was fun going through several of those examples in one of my chapters.
Well, I hope everyone listening can hear in those examples just how much healing is available within Christianity for men and women, and just how much it does reconcile the sexes, like you say.
Yes, I was so glad when I saw that your principle number 3 had the same word, reconcile,
Yes.
reconciling the sexes.